Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
And we're here with Danny Rader. Now tell me, I've been knowing you forever. Welcome.
Hey.
I've heard people call you Danny Radar. It's Rader, right?
It is Rader with an E.
Thank you.
Yes.
Vindicated.
I always say it's like the football team with no I.
Right.
Because there's no I in this team.
Danny Rader is one of my he's a great human being, first of all. But on top of that, he is one of the best session guys in town, as well as a legendary touring, a pillar in the touring community. He's been out with Aldean, been out with Keith Urban for a decade. Just, kind of the best of both worlds when you look at it like that. He's also won ACM's 3 times, I believe.
Correct. Yeah.
Like Utility Player of the Year.
Still blows my mind.
And Guitar Player of the Year, right?
Yeah, it was Utility 2 times and Guitar Player once. Yeah.
Now that's interesting because I know you're a great guitar player, but it's like your utility. And for those people who don't know, session players who are utility players are dudes that usually they may play fiddle, lap steel, pedal steel, banjo, mandolin, bouzouki, acoustic guitar, you name it, they play it. They're usually in a booth, and it's like one dude doing like 10 overdubs after everyone else is on their phone in the lounge. But that's a rare distinction to have somebody who plays as many instruments as you. And you play, how many would you say you'd be proficient in recording in the studio on?
Oh my gosh. Probably close to 13 or 15. I haven't actually officially counted. I've always had a bit of a spirit of like, if I get asked to do something, I'm going to say, yeah, sure. And then figure it out once I get in there. So,
yeah.
I don't know.
Do you play boom sax?
Boom sax?
Do you know what boom sax is?
I've never even heard of boom sax. What are those?
I just saw this amazing Tenacious D video. It's a kid's toy it's actually very cool. It's kind of like a riff toy where you just hit different things.
Oh, yeah.
And they start this whole amazing thing on stage. I will put the link in the description to this. But it's like you're so known for all those instruments, right? But you're still like a spectacular guitar player. So, and as a result, Guitar Player of the Year. But it would just seem like the other stuff you do is so extraordinary and unique that they'd probably focus on that. Were you actually nominated for both in that year?
The way that those awards are structured, if you win in a category, you're actually ineligible from being nominated the following year.
Oh,
so
really?
The year that I won for utility stuff, I was ineligible for that category the next year. And for whatever reason, my peers nominated me for the guitar category and ended up winning that. And then the next year, I was eligible for the utility again, so came back up there. So it's
wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's
it's
awesome.
interesting the way that works. But yeah.
Well, you are legendary status in the session world and on the touring scene. But it's like it's really an incredible thing to watch a guy be so proficient. It's like when you're in the studio and we're doing overdubs on you, it's not like, you may go back to punch something in, but it's just to watch somebody play at that level and then just be able to shift to a completely different instrument and play on that level. It's a stunning thing. All that you can credit to your childhood growing up. You were in a family band, right?
That's right. Yeah, we did.
Florida.
Yeah, down in Panama City, Florida. It was called the Ocean Opry Show. And we did probably 200 shows a year with our family in the theater there. And so that started in 1978 and I was born a few years later. So that was already full steam by the time I was even born. So I don't remember life before everyone was just playing music all the time.
Those are always the best musicians. Nashville has a couple of those. They're just
we did shows with our family band, and then and those were very much like in the Branson Pigeon Forge style. A lot of different varying styles of stuff. And then my granddad, who was kind of the patriarch and started the business, he also promoted shows. So he would book, throughout the 30 plus years that they ran it, he booked everyone from Merle Haggard, Mel Tillis, George Jones, Oak Ridge Boys a handful of times, Randy Travis. Yeah, you name it. So it was Jerry Reed. It's a long list.
So tell me,
got to see like right up front and meet him. And
when you were,
for sure.
When you're in this family band, was it like everybody was already had the main instruments? So it was like when you came in, it was like, oh, I got to go find something else to play? Was that?
That's exactly what it was. It was, find something to make some kind of noise on and
It's like, hey, he's got the guitar ready.
Carve out your lane, Yeah. And that's really truthfully what, like there was a lot of examples. Like when I was really young, I started playing drums was actually what I started on. And I would play a few songs throughout the night. My older brother, who had become our full-time drummer when he was about 9, I think, 8 or 9, somewhere in there, was like the full-time drummer in the show. And when he would go up to sing or go over to do something else, I would slip up and I'd play drums. And I was 7, I guess, at the time, 7 or 8. And then just as time developed, I kind of took over and played more drums as he played keyboards. And throughout the years, we would, have anywhere from 1 to 2 outside musicians outside of the family that we would hire. Sometimes a steel player, sometimes an outside piano player. And depending on who we had there, Brent, my brother, and I, we would kind of bounce around and fill in the holes where my uncle played lead guitar all the time. My dad played bass a bunch and steel throughout the years. My granddad played acoustic. And so we all just kind of hopped around and bounced around. And there was plenty of like, oh, my cousin's got a baseball game tonight. Oh, okay, well, I'll play that on this. And,
That's
so
amazing.
We kind of bounced around. And we didn't know that we should be nervous about, I'll play this instrument in the show tonight. Sure. Like,
well, there's a cool thing is probably where you got better than your uncle on guitar. And maybe you didn't. Maybe your uncle was insane. But knowing you, it's like, well, geez, there's got to be a point where people are like, hey, why don't you let Danny take a couple of the solos?
It was interesting. My uncle is super great. And stylistically, he was so good at that, like, Glenn Campbell, Roy Clark style, Jimmy Cap style guitar, which is most of the music that we did in the show at the time was that type of thing. So I learned a ton from him on that kind of stuff. And then, certainly as styles became more progressive and the 70s, 80s rock stuff kind of started influencing what country guitar tones sounded like and things like that, then I was able to, I think kind of influence a little bit on what he did. And, everybody it's family. So there's always, you kind of bump into each other sometimes, but there's always this kind of like underlying love and respect and
in your family.
Yeah, well, did anybody else from your family, continue the career like you did coming to Nashville? And
his brother,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. My older brother, who's a year and a half older than me, he lives in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, which is just about 45 minutes from where I am. And he does session work full time out there. He's toured with Jody Messina and Joe Nichols in the past.
Oh, wow.
Keyboard player, right? Primarily.
Well, he also plays everything, but primarily keyboards and drums. But he's got a studio set up at his place and does a bunch of stuff where he just kind of plays the whole track down, everything, so he's insanely talented as well.
So when you came to Nashville and it was like, okay, did you feel like, oh man, I got to really step it up? Or were you already kind of like, oh, I'm actually able to be at this level?
That's a great question. I was fully confident coming to town that I was going to be able to tell a few people, hey, I'm here. And I would get called left and right, but it was a rude awakening when I got to town and realized there are a lot of really talented people here that are way in line ahead of me. Actually, one of the first things I did after we moved, you remember the Players were playing a regular weekly gig over at 3rd and Lindsley, which is Eddie Bears, Paul Franklin, Brent Mason, Michael Rhodes, and John Hobbs. And I was a big fan of all those guys session playing and read their names on labels and bought all the records that I knew they would be playing on. And I went down and saw them, and my jaw was just on the floor for about 3 hours watching those guys do what they do. It just blew my mind. And it was like half parts emasculating, just realizing how far I had to go. But it was also like equal parts inspiring because it was like, I'm going to woodshed and I'm going to learn that lick. I'm going to learn that part of that song.
There is a thing that a musician can do, and people will point at you at a bar and say, oh my God, he might be the best guitar player I've ever seen. What they're not taking into account is that is one of 5 gags that guy has, right?
Right.
And as a session player, you've just got to be at another level all the time. And, session players have certain things they do. Maybe they fall into like, hey, I might have played this on something else. But there's got to be a level of like ingenuity in regards to finding great parts and performance that you're not ripping yourself off with your 1 or 2 tricks, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you'll find people say he's the best guitar player I've ever heard, and then you get them into the studio and they just fall apart. As a producer, you watch them just floundering, trying to succeed, and they're not. So the studio is really revealing in that fact. Did you have the studio chops, or were they something you got over the first 2 years? How did that look?
That's a great question. I actually had a lot. I had more experience in the studio with headphones on than I did playing like big concert type things. Probably. I mean, we did our family shows, but my dad ran a studio growing up at our theater. So he did a bunch of outside custom projects. So my whole childhood was spent watching him make records and cut and splice tape and the whole thing there. And then right out of high school, I was able to get into, there was maybe 4 different project studios down in North Florida within an hour and a half drive of Panama City. So my brother and I were basically a good chunk of the tracking band at all 4 of those studios. So, a lot of those studios would end up kind of putting together one project a week, whether it's a Southern gospel record or a praise and worship record or some outside country thing that was coming in. And so we would go in and we did a ton of tracking. We would track at one studio on Monday, track like 10 songs by the end of the day. And while they were finishing out the record the rest of the week, then we would go to the other studio the next day and track there and track at our place, the third day. And so that kind of all pieced together. So I actually had a lot of experience in the studio early on. And much of it was with Brent and I, my brother, building the tracks top to bottom, just the 2 of us. And what I learned there was how easy it is to overplay in the studio. When you're not thinking about the big picture and everything that's going to go into this track, it's real easy to feel like you need to fill up this one guitar pass so that it has more energy in that time. But when you start stacking the solos on top of that and other things, you realize, I overplayed all this. There's not room. So I learned a lot of the art of simplifying the part, letting the tone speak for itself, and let the part and the power chord bloom throughout the bar instead of feeling like you have to do all this in between stuff. And that was a really good opportunity to kind of get my chops in the studio before I had the pressure cooker of being in Nashville and knowing that if I had an off day, they were going to call somebody else and I wouldn't be on their list anymore, because down there wasn't really anybody else to call. So we had the opportunity to kind of learn as we went,
How long did it take you to get secure in your studio life in Nashville to feel like, okay, I'm kind of in this?
Well, let's see. We moved in 2004. I would say within about 3 or 4 years, I felt like I was kind of in the door, so to speak. And it's, there was a few guys that started calling me and giving me opportunities pretty early on. Adam Schoenfeld was one of the first to start calling me for records and
I hate that
stuff.
guy.
And I don't know.
Look at Mike. Mike left because of it.
Sorry,
conversation.
Yeah. So, I would say 3 or 4 years before I was kind of felt like I was at least like I belonged there when I would get a call, and then it just kind of steadily grew over the years and more stuff started coming in. And
Are you producing it all these days, Danny, or you?
I'm still doing some. Yeah. There's a few kind of development things that I'm working on, and I'll go through periods where I'll do a lot of that stuff, and then I'll kind of get busy getting called for sessions and not do a ton for 6 months or so. But then
stylistically, is there a certain type of thing that you get called for production wise? Are you doing country? Is it
mostly country?
Not country?
Yeah,
okay.
It's pretty much country, kind of straight ahead, like radio sounding country type stuff.
Cool.
So yeah.
I was going to ask you, at what point did you lose the anxiety of being in a session where you're like, oh, I got all these guys. If I screw up this take, or when did you feel like, oh, I'm kind of like this, I can do this?
I would say after the first, probably the first 9 or 10 sessions that I did in town, that was kind of started to be gone. Cause I realized it was very similar to what I was used to doing sessions, and even the big guys have to go back and punch stuff and make mistakes or whatever. And I learned pretty early on, like from a few guys that just by example, like if you're going to miss big and own it, because at least you were playing something with conviction, rather than like play an entire track and not really have anything that really says anything,
My pet peeve back when I was doing a ton of demos, because I was a songwriter signed to a place that I needed to get maybe 50 to 60 things done a year.
Right.
My big pet peeve was when you would have a drummer play on the and of 4 and on the 1 before chorus, just in case the band pushed. He'd be like, "Oh yeah, I got it covered there."
Oh.
You know?
That's hilarious.
Yeah, man, it's funny. You know, there's a real thing too that we always talk about, which is like, okay, Danny's a great player, but Danny's also all the solutions in the room. It's like if you have a question, he's got a really insightful, intelligent thing to say that's in the best interest of the song, right? So he's a friend. He's not a foe in the studio. He's not playing on the end of 4 and on 1. He's missing big if he misses it all. But really great parts. But it's like there's an energy there that when he's there, you feel like, hey, we're a little basketball team and we're going to win the championship today. You know,
Yeah, right.
And that's a really special thing. And I'm really lucky because the space I have, we're all in one area, right? So, and even if we are in an ISO booth, you still are right there. You're like just right through the glass. So you're very connected in the space. And to have the right people in that environment with the Jimmy Lee Sloses or Mark Hills and you know, all the guys that we use, it's like there's a really special thing that happens where you feel like the day has meaning and everybody wants the song to win. And that takes a special person. You have to make a decision to do that as a player, right? Because you could be like, I hate the song. It's beneath me. I shouldn't be even on this date. Or, you know, you could fall into that.
To me, the song and the artist are always the reason that we're there. You know, if I'm playing anything that is not serving the lyric of the song, then I'm out of place. You know, and interestingly, it's funny because I know some guys in town and some of my good friends are just amazing shredders and can just play licks and solos that'll blow your mind. And I've never felt like I was a great like shredder because so much of the music that I grew up on was story songs. You know, I loved the Jim Croce's and the James Taylors and the Jerry Reeds, which has some licks, but it's not necessarily like Eddie Van Halen type blow your mind playing, you know, because I was always really moved by the stories that were being told in the songs. And so I've never really felt super led to develop those chops or even really had the opportunity to, because I just wasn't really that moved by that music as much. And so what I've found myself being uniquely more gifted at is just simpler parts that are in the right spot with the right pocket, you know, because as y'all know, making records, the same lick 30 milliseconds early is not the same lick anymore. You know, if it's not right in the spot, and if you're not listening to the drummer's right hand where his hi-hat's sitting, you know, or where the snare, you know, a lot of guys will kind of drift a little bit when they do a fill going into a chorus. And if you just keep flogging ahead during that fill, it's going to be Flam City. So you got to be listening to all of those things, even though you're playing what's seemingly a simple acoustic part. You know, you got to be in and out, and you're kind of dancing around the vocal phrasing with when you're doing upstrokes and things like that, that, you know, there is no simple part that is simple at a certain point. You got to really be engaged in it and listening to everybody in the room all the time, you know? Yeah.
And, you know, because I have so many friends, I tend to like be attracted to people that still have the fire and passion for why they got into. And as a byproduct of that, I get friends of friends and people that are they're just at the beginning of what they're doing, but they've got a passion for it, and they end up in my barn, whether I give it to them or, you know, whether they rent it. But you'll end up on those sessions, and these people are not like the rest of the sessions. Sometimes they would we can all say they're beneath us, but there's a really beautiful thing that happens where the music, people actually push a little harder.
Yeah, totally.
I love that about the gang that we use in the studio. It's that they can recognize that, hey, this person is not going to be on the radio next year, right? But there's something beautiful in really sort of a point of origin story, which is like, I remember whenever I felt this way about my music, and I want to stay in touch with it, and I can do that by being a part of this person's experience today. So some of those sessions are my favorite. Artistically, some of those days are the absolute best. I will say that. There was a funny record that I did a little while back with this guy from Canada. He's primarily French speaking from Quebec. And just, you know, the communication with him was super weird. Like, he didn't seem like he had a cell phone at first. And the band that he, you know, kind of asked me to put together for him, like, none of us had ever worked for him before. And we were like, are we going to
get paid for this thing, or is this going to be like, he was staying at Opryland Hotel, so the number he gave me to call him was the front desk and told me he was at what room he was in. And I was just like, this sounds a little off. We got there, and I want to say the band was Near, Mark Hill, Dan Dugmore, and myself, and it was the coolest record I've done in years.
I heard Near talk about this record. I know
it was like Bon Iver meets kind of like Explosions in the Sky with some Bread vocal elements in it. It was just like so fun, so cool.
That's amazing.
So can you talk a little bit about what happens when you don't get paid? When that exact circumstance, but all of a sudden the check bounces? Because I'm sure it happens, right?
Yeah, it's happened. More likely than the check bouncing is just you getting put off, and you know, 6 months go by and you still haven't gotten paid for this thing, and you're like trying to track it down. And you know, for me, that's one of the benefits of doing as much as we can on the card, which for those that don't know is through the American Federation of Musicians is the union that kind of protects session players and has certain safeguards for, you know, what we get paid, and that way, you know, regulates our rates and guarantees that when things get used in movies on the back end or different uses, that we get the residual or the bump that we're entitled to due to the negotiations that they have with the major labels. So that, you know, that's definitely one benefit, because then we have people that can kind of track that stuff down for us, and we don't have to be worried about the 8 records that we haven't been paid for 6 months ago. You know, it's like they're on it.
Let's say I don't pay you and you're like, hey, we're trying to get that money from that guy, and then I call you to do another date. Do you take it?
I'm far less likely to take it.
It's total musician answer.
I'm not saying I'm not taking it, but
it all depends on what your definition of is.
If you had stiffed me twice, I definitely wouldn't take it.
Yeah.
Stiff me once.
What's the point? Why am I gonna go?
I won't be stiffed
my
again.
Services for a whole day.
Right. I hope we don't get stiffed again. That's amazing.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. You know, as a self-employed person, it's like you really have to like respect the work and show up for the work. So it's like if you stop doing that, you know, if you have a bad attitude in a session, or you don't care for the people and they can tell that, or you just, you know, you have to be like, okay, maybe this is just what this guy says it is, and I will get paid, and it's just a slow pay rather than a no pay.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's where you know, having relationships with people is so important, and having friends and being a friend, because then when someone says, hey man, my budget's tight on this, I can only do this on this or whatever. Or if it's a matter of, you know, you calling me because you paid me on time every time for so long. If there is a time where I haven't gotten paid from you and you call me and you say, dude, I'm so sorry, this guy or this girl they haven't paid me yet, and it's a little messy on this end. I'm going to trust you and believe that because you've proven to me that you're upright and forthcoming on that stuff. So, you know, that's, I heard very early on when I moved to town, someone had asked a very prominent producer here in town at a thing. My wife went to Belmont, and she was at one of the little, you know, not a ceremony, but like a Q&A thing that she had to go to for a music business degree. And they asked this producer, how do you manage business contacts and networking, and how do you suggest young people getting into the business handle that stuff? And his answer was basically, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I would make friends and be a friend. And I've just taken that advice, and, you know, I've tried to know people really well and allow them to know me really well, so that when we have a water heater burst at 2 a.m. and I'm in Peoria, Illinois, we've got somebody that can come over and help out, or, you know, if somebody's dad dies or what, you know, whatever life throws at you, you've got actual friends rather than just a large network of business contacts, but nobody that you really know, you know.
Right. Good point, and good way to live. I mean, you got to, and there's a certain amount of loss in every business, you know? You got to, at a certain point, you have to look back at your invoices and be thankful that you only have that many unpaid.
Yeah, right.
You know, I think it's reasonable.
Yeah.
So tons of studio work for you, tons of logistics. You have a studio at your place. You've done tracks for me over there. They sound great. The other part of your life, which is taking all this stuff you do, you go in the studio to record all this stuff, then you sometimes go out on the road with those artists, or you're out on the road with an artist where and you have to successfully pull off a lot of the guitars from a record that is maybe guitar intensive. How do you make that happen on stage, like with a Keith Urban, where it's a guitar centric record?
Yeah.
How are you managing all these things you're doing? Like,
that's a great question. I've usually will take, like with Keith, for example, I have a pretty good read on what he is going to want to play, which parts from the record he's going to want to play at this point. So with that one, I'll take everything else that you hear, note wise and lick wise, and try to compile that into one kind of hybrid part. And a lot of times there might be a mandolin lick in the second verse that you don't really notice the mandolin a lot in the song, but it might be a little thing in that verse. And even if I'm playing just a straight up electric on the song, I'll cover that lick so you hear that melody. Or if it's kind of thing where there's been times where like there's a 12-string electric part on the record and then there's a regular acoustic part, and I might play a bouzouki live, even though it's not on the record, but it allows me melodically to cover that same energy and kind of meld those two parts together. And it's a kind of an ever moving target. Honestly, it just kind of depends on the song
and how much of that, like, let's say day one of rehearsals, it'd be kind of cool to know what this looks like, because I don't know. Maybe this is what I imagine. You've got a big room at SAR, and they're doing light and PA, getting the monitors together, and you guys are going to be like, okay, what is the show going to be like? And I'm sure the show could be anything from a catalog of 60 things that gets narrowed down to 24 on any given night, right?
Right.
But like, are you the one that's saying like, this is how I'm going to deal with this song? Or is Keith saying, I want you to do this, and I'm sure it's an amalgamation, but what's that look like? It
usually starts with me kind of knowing, what's Keith want to play on this song? And if it's bass, or, there's a few songs where he'll play bass, I know I'm covering all the guitars. So I'll kind of.
Are you the only other guitar player besides Keith on that live?
Yeah, there's Nate Barlow, who he plays guitar on a few songs just so he can kind of get down and wander around. But for the most part, he's doing other sampling, and he's got the rig, he calls it the Phantom. So he's doing that most of the time up there, covering all the synthy, wacky stuff. But then, if I know he's playing guitar, then I'll just kind of take that into account, and I'll have a game plan for what I plan on doing when we come in. But when he comes in, it might not change at all, but I might be on a totally different instrument by the time we're done,
And I notice you're playing,
and you just got to be super flexible on that kind of thing. Like whatever you did yesterday means nothing today.
Well, it helps to be like super confident in your playing, to be like, whatever you want. If you want me to play that on this, no problem, right? It's not like, how do I capo a banjo on the 16th fret, because I only know it in this one particular form.
Right.
So I noticed you play some Brian Nutter guitars. And Brian, when you were talking about another guitar player, Keith, Brian and Danny were both playing guitar with Keith for a while, and Brian Nutter went on to do Nutter guitars, and Brian's been in the hospital quite a bit.
Yes.
I hear he's out. It seems like he's doing better. Have you heard anything more than I know?
The most recent I heard this morning was that they're supposed to have his stent taken out today. And they had gone in, and I think he's been feeling great. He
had a tear in his esophagus.
Yeah, just a total freak accident. Weird thing. He had sunflower seeds in his throat, and he kind of got one stuck. And as he was trying to cough it up, it ended up, just cutting a tear in his esophagus. So he had sunflower seeds and shells end up going into his chest cavity, and then all kinds of infections. And
it ended up being this little thing that shows you how precious life is, because it's like it starts off as a sunflower seed, and next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, is what's going on here?
Yeah.
So
and then
sweet guy.
And then unfortunately, due to the COVID issues that were going on, the whole like back half of when he was stuck in the hospital, Blake, his wife, wasn't able to really get in there and spend time with him and care for him. So he was just kind of stuck up there for a long time, unfortunately.
Well, God bless him. We love Brian.
And much better.
Sweet guy. Great guitar builder. I noticed that you and Keith both play a couple of his guitars, and one of them is that cool banjo. Bottom, 12, a regular guitar on top, right?
It's basically a Cabernita on the top with like a kind of Filtertron pickup, and then the Ganjo on the bottom. Yeah.
The Ganjo's great. It sounds amazing. A gig,
honestly, it is my favorite sounding Ganjo live. And a big part of that to me is the small resonator. Anytime I've tried to play like a full resonator body, you're basically walking around with a condenser mic on a stage with 115 decibels coming off of everybody. So it's impossible to play live. But the small resonator allows it to really be a lot more focused and doesn't just go.
Are you guys still using amps? Are you using Kempers, or what are you using?
I've actually been using Fractals for a few years now. I've kind of made the switch, and honestly, I didn't want to like it. I really wanted to hate it when I first entertained the idea, but I love it, But the great thing about that gig, though, is we still have plenty of stage volume.
There's still cabinets going?
I have a couple of wedges behind me that I can put as much of my guitar in it as I want to, and so a funny thing about that, when I first switched over to the Fractals, they sound fantastic. Like if you're recording with them or whatever, the sound of them is great. The experience of playing it live with zero stage volume, to me, is where I would get hung up on not enjoying that experience. But when I first switched over, we put some wedges down so I'd still have some stage volume, but our monitor guy, just like you normally would for most people, put them in front, which I haven't had a wedge in front of me in, gosh, probably 12 years at this point, maybe. So I'm just not used to having loud noise coming right back at me on a stage. And I didn't like that, but we moved him back behind me. And as soon as I got him behind me, it was like, oh yeah, this is how it's supposed to be. I was like,
cabinet,
a guitar cab again,
That's
cool.
cool.
To me, that's the perfect combination. Because the thing I do love about the Fractals is there's no like power issues. You don't have an issue of if you're only getting 112 today as opposed to 130 or whatever. It's super consistent. And just as much as Keith likes to tweak and change his guitar tone, we'll have sound checks where he's spending an hour just on his guitar before we even start playing. So his stuff is constantly gain stage changing and things like that, which is just part of his process. Can't argue with that. And but I always felt like my role was super consistent. As long as our front of house guy can push up the fader and know that I'm going to be exactly where I ought to be, that and the Fractals really help with that.
Well, I went to see a show, and I think you guys were still on Palmer PDIs.
Oh yeah,
I know
that was
you
a
guys
while back.
It's a while back. It was whenever I had the hit with Keith. And we went there, and I was stunned because it was, and I actually think I said this to somebody recently on the podcast. Like, it was one of the few concerts I went to that I could say, oh, Keith is on his neck position on his Les Paul. It's like, oh, that Jaguar is on the bridge position. And it's like, how often do you go to a concert in an arena where you can hear like, oh, that kind of nuance? It sounded so good. I don't know who's in front of house, but they did an amazing job.
Back then, that would have been Tom Abraham. Tom
Amazing.
Abraham has been out with a bunch of different rock acts primarily, but yeah, super great.
And what is your life like on the road? Is it just like a whole bunch of like chilling until
it's a lot of waiting, a lot of waiting.
What do you do with that off time? Just like,
watch.
How do you make it productive?
Goofy YouTube videos. Actually, I had gotten to the point where I kept a mobile recording rig out in a road case, and so I would do a lot of overdubs while I was out. And
that's cool.
We'll see what happens after all this COVID mess. what life looks like. I don't know. That was when we had. I would just have it in the dressing room all the time, and I'll. But the great thing is when you are away, you're still not totally away because you can do the electric overdubs are a lot easier to do on the road than acoustic overdubs. I'll say.
Oh right.
Acoustics are tough because every room is different, and
the generator is probably on all the time if you're on the bus.
Yeah. Acoustic overdubs on a bus is a funny thing. I'll basically, turn the AC on and crank it down and get it as nice and cool as you can, especially if you're out there in the summertime. And then just, shut it off and get it as quiet as you can. But there's so many times you'll be playing a part and you get somebody walking in at a certain point. You got to go back and punch those bars or whatever. You got to knock it out before they start line checking too. Because once they start line checking, you hear all the kick drums and snares and hear them going through all the toms. You're done at that point.
we were backstage at that show, and I can remember thinking it was one of the first shows at a big venue that I'd been backstage. Maybe I just remember being stricken by the reality that like, oh, this is not as fun as in my mind, like the Almost Famous movie. It's like getting backstage. Your whole life was spent trying to get backstage, and then like you're backstage, you're like, This is completely boring.
Oh man, our
Up front.
band is probably the most boring band in country music. Usually after a gig, we are in comfy pants and watching like Storage Wars within about 15 minutes. So,
that's incredible.
Not rock and roll.
That's amazing.
But there's also a beauty in that because there's no drama. It's just an easy hang. And
how big is that crew? Is it how many tractor trailers are you moving with, and how many people on buses?
It depends on whether we're doing like a hard ticket tour. That's usually anywhere.
What's a hard ticket tour?
So that would be like Keith Urban playing all the sheds in arenas.
As opposed to a festival or something.
As opposed to like a festival year. With Keith, it's usually like an on year and an off year. So the on year would be a hard ticket tour. We're doing 90 shows, something like that. And on those years, we probably have anywhere from 65 to 70 people total. And I want to say like usually like 7 buses and 13 or 14 trucks, depending on what the production is like. And then the off years, which was when we do like mostly festivals and a few corporates, and we might do 30 to 40 shows on those years. And then we kind of scale back, and the crew is probably 25 or 30. We don't usually take nearly as much in the way of production on those years. So it's, down to 4 buses, 3 or 4 buses. No, it's 4 buses. And then sometimes like as little as 2 trucks, 3 trucks on those years. Because we pretty much just carry our band gear, right. And all the production stuff. So
Brian told me a story once about how he was coming back from an injury, first time back on stage, and you're playing a private party in Long Island, and Paul McCartney was right in front of him.
Yeah.
You remember this?
I do.
He said he was about to do this. He had a stroke. So he was reacquainting.
I forgot that gig was right after he had his stroke, though.
So he was telling I was writing with him one day, and he was saying like, there's a lot of times I'll say a word for the first time after my stroke, and it's like I need to reacquaint myself with it. It's kind of like you have to sort of understand it again and then put it in a new filing cabinet. He said it's the same way with guitar playing. So like, it's like I know all this stuff that I'm supposed to play, and there was a particularly detailed intro that was difficult for him to play. It was just Brian.
Right.
And he had just, he'd been kind of relearning it. And they had gotten this call for like, hey, we're going to do this one-off date. It's a private birthday party. And he says, it's just him. He starts to play it. He looks out, and like 10 feet away is Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
And he's like, this is the last thing I need right now.
Right. Yeah. That was a trip that day.
Did you get to meet Paul McCartney?
Did not get to meet him. I saw him in front of us, but I did not get to meet him. No.
I met Paul McCartney in New York City. My first week I lived in New York City. I lived on the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
Oh, this is funny.
I was walking. Yeah, I've told you this story, I think.
It's great.
This is like December, and I'm walking from my apartment, which was 79th in New York, over to like a Radio Shack with a buddy of mine. The only person I knew in New York City at the time. We were walking to 83rd and 3rd at Radio Shack. We went over there and walking down this street. It's a one-way street. And my buddy like elbows me in the ribs. He's like, Paul McCartney. And Paul McCartney's getting out of his town car. And I just started like out-of-body experience. I started bowing to the guy. It was so embarrassing, man. I
remember that time.
I lost all sense of like, yeah. I was just bowing, and he just laughed. He was such a pro too. He's just like, hey guys, happy holidays. Like, but he said it in a way it's like, all right, let's keep moving. Everybody's gonna be cool.
This dude might be dangerous.
I've never done that in my life.
He talks really quickly, and you're like escorted away.
Totally.
Hey, not to mention, the weirdest thing about that story is that you were going to Radio Shack as a professional musician.
Yeah,
no, totally. I don't know what I was going for.
Sometimes I go over to the Shack, just to look at what instruments are out, what new microphones.
I kind of miss having Radio Shacks. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I know.
What kind of quarter-inch microphones might be available on the market?
Totally. Right. I need that adapter from the quarter-inch to the 1/8 inch. Damn, I gotta go on Amazon.
I have been to many a Radio Shack with Brian Nutter. Speaking of Brian,
yeah,
he's such a nerd, rebuilding stuff and changing pickups out and stuff. We have spent plenty of times.
Well, that must be nice to be out on the road with a good crew of guys that you don't want to like hate, that are easy to like, in a good hang, and everybody knows how to be cool on a bus, because that's a learned behavior as well, being cool on a bus.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you spend at most 2.5, maybe 3 hours on stage, including a sound check on a day. And the rest of the time you're living with these people. So,
yeah. So I want to know how you manage this. Cause obviously with a big band like Aldean and a big band like Keith, and I know you've been out with a ton of people, but like in those really big bands, they're not paying you like, hey, come out 3 dates this week. They're putting you on retainer, right? Mm-hmm. Which means, hey man, stop Tuesday. There's a gig. Whatever you had planned Tuesday is no longer on Tuesday.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, pretty much.
How do you book sessions? How do you make the life happen when you're like, oh, I might have to bounce on all these plans, guys. I know I'm the session leader for this.
Right. Yeah. You got to always be flexible, and you got to always have a couple of guys that you can call if you do need to sub something out, and knowing that they're going to do a great job when they show up and they do have to sub in for you.
Well, it bothers me because like I want you there. That's true, dude. It's like you get your heart set on players because you want them in the room for a certain reason. And then it's like you understand, and I never give anyone grief. I never, when they bail, because I know I'm usually working at low budget master or limited pressing. And if they got a triple scale master, like, well, who am I to tell them? Like, hey man, you told me you'd be here. Right. Mm-hmm. So like, I never really, but it's like in my heart of hearts, I'm like, that's a real loss for the session because I want that guy in the room. And you have great subs, but they're not you. People hire you because of you. It's such a personal business.
And I try to personally always, if there is something that I do have to bail on for that type of thing, always try to add the caveat. And I'm not saying everybody has to do this, but I always feel kind of led to at least try to add, hey, if anything isn't exactly, if you're not totally digging what you got, send it over. I'll do it at my place and try to make it right, because it was me that had to bail. I'd said I could be there and I couldn't. So, but I think everybody is used to the deal,
So, you could pretty much book a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday session without any fear, right?
Generally speaking, yeah.
Right? So you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then Thursday and Friday get a little squirrely maybe? You can't do Friday.
I mean,
for sure.
With an artist as big as Keith, it's very seldom that stuff comes in less than a few months out. Like there's so many moving parts.
But like TV shows
that have to happen.
Paul McCartney parties might spring up.
Occasionally, yeah. The shortest notice I've ever had, this was probably 2013 maybe. I was mowing my yard at like 2:00 and I got a call from our tour manager. He said, hey, can you be at the airport by 5? And I'm like, oh no, he was like, can you get to the airport? And I said, I guess I can. He's like, well, you got a 5:00 flight. I need you to get there. And American Idol the next day or something like that. So we had to get to the air, literally like rinse off the shower, off we go. And we were playing Idol the next night.
So when you do that, do you have like a rig that travels, or how do you, or do they do all backline? Did you bring a guitar with you, or do they? With
Keith, we have an A rig, a B rig, and then there's like a C rig. So, and it's for the most part, as much as possible, pretty redundant gear. But in that case, I just carried a guitar with me and we backlined the gear.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What is if your recollection over all the years, any artist, what are some of the like coolest stadium like moments, or like, holy crap, we're doing this right now? That guy's right there. That's
the first one that comes to mind is we did a festival, a rock festival in Quebec City a handful of years ago, and it was like 90,000 people. And stage with Foo Fighters played the night after us, and I think it was like the Stones that were on the night before us. I don't know how they got us on that gig, but we were headlining that night, and it was the most surreal thing to be playing to a crowd that large. And just something about their energy and spirit in there. It felt like, there were times in the gig where they would just break out into these like soccer stadium chants going back and forth. And it was like this kind of out of body experience where it's like, it's not just about them and us. Like there's a circular thing that we're all a part of right now.
Yeah, that's cool.
Experience, that's definitely one that we still
And how
talk
about someone you got to meet, like that you, like a McCartney, I know you didn't get to meet him, but like,
I did get to meet McCartney at the Grammys a couple of years after that experience, just really quick in the hallway in passing. It was super, super nice.
Did you bow?
I should have bowed.
Oh, so embarrassing.
Man, there's been so many. We've had John Fogerty sitting in with us was pretty surreal. Frampton, getting to sit in with Frampton, and we did Get Back with Frampton at what gig was it? I think it was just at our gig at Bridgestone a few years back, and got to play the Billy Preston Wurlitzer part on Get Back.
Oh, that's amazing.
Pretty wild.
That's so cool.
Jack Black sat in with us once, did The Devil Went Down to Georgia. That was pretty awesome. Yeah, funny story about him. When we did he came to soundcheck and we ran the song a handful of times, and he was super hilarious and funny and down to earth and charming. And we finished soundcheck and he comes over to the band. Keith was going off to do his meet and greet and stuff. And we're kind of walking down the hallway, and Jack Black says to the band, those of us in the band, he's like, "So what are you guys doing now?" We're like, "We're going to go eat dinner and, hang for a bit." He's like, "Cool." And he just sits down, eats dinner with us. And we're walking by at one point. This was at Staples Center. And we walked through one of the tunnels, and, it's where people pull their cars in. And the guy drove like an 8 or 9 year old Honda Accord or something completely normal and regular. That's and amazing. We were like, "Where's your posse, man?" He's like, "I roll alone." And we were like, "Of course you do."
That guy, it's so cool that guy doesn't disappoint. You'd hope he wouldn't be a total douche, right?
Yeah, you never know, because usually you're disappointed when you meet people that you really respect or think the world of. But he was just super awesome. He came to the dressing room and we watched Led Zeppelin YouTube videos for an hour before we had to get ready for the gig.
And what a voice that guy has! I mean, he's got a stellar voice.
Insane.
I mean, that Tenacious D thing is a joke, but it's it's on order of better than Spinal Tap recordings. The records are really good. Mm-hmm. It's really compelling stuff.
People don't know. Yeah.
They have no idea. They just think it's a joke thing. But that guy sings, and when he sings, he'll be doing an interview and sing something. It's he may have perfect pitch, but if he doesn't, his relative pitch is perfect. He's just he nails everything.
The tone of his voice and the support when he gets up into that falsetto and the stuff, it's it's great. It's awesome.
Such a great thing, man, not to be disappointed by your heroes,
Absolutely.
It's hard to recover from. You spend your whole childhood digging into a record, then you're like, "Oh my God, all his memories have to be trash now."
Yeah,
it's like that guy ruined it for me.
Yeah.
Be careful when you meet your heroes.
Totally.
Well, that's amazing, dude. I'm gonna find that boom sax thing that he did, which is it's incredibly cool. It actually sounds really good when they hit the downbeat with the band. It sounds like a Rage Against the Machine kind of thing. So
nice.
it's
I'm gonna find one and add it to my session cartage rig.
Yeah. And is it Kyle? What's the other guy? KC?
Kyle, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, he's playing a regular recorder from the 7th grade.
Right.
Very cool. Hey, man. So why don't you tell us a little bit about where people can find you if they want to have you play on records? Is that possible for them to send you stuff? What's your level of willingness to be engaged with?
Absolutely. I'm always doing overdubs for whoever here at the house. It's one of the beautiful things of where we are these days that we can do that. So Instagram at Rader, Instagram and Twitter at Rader, or just search for Danny Rader and I'm on there. There's a few fakes every now and then that pop up, but mine's got the blue check, so you'll know it that way.
Oh, verified.
Yeah. Perks of a Keith Urban gig. He's as a social media person that's like, "I'll get you a blue check." Okay. So just send me direct messages on there and I'll can exchange emails that way and go from there. And
we'll put them down in the description as well. And Danny can do anything at his house. If you have something that's more of a bigger record where you want a full band, he's a session leader that will be able to manage all that and get you into a great room to make those records. So he can manage anything from just an overdub to a custom-built project at his house, as well as all the way up to a full-blown Grammy Award winning record, which he's played on a million of. So, man, you're a good soul, and it's
you too. Thanks.
You've never let us down musically or just hang wise. You're a good dude.
And you guys inspire me. It's you especially always have such great songs. Anytime we're down there, I don't know. Sometimes they're yours, sometimes they're outside songs, but you always pick great songs, even if they're not yours, which is always a pleasure.
Well, much appreciated. So you don't have a website though? No website.
I don't.
Okay, no problem.
Old school. Just
all right. So we'll get your Twitter and your Instagram down there if you want to reach out to Danny and work with him. He'll be more than glad to take your call. So
cool.
Thank you so much, man. You're an inspiration, like we said. And
thank you, Danny.
Appreciate
you coming
y'all
on and being such a good dude.
Awesome.
Signing off from the West Barn. We'll see you next time.